I went to Canada in the fall of 1956 after a chance summer trip to Vancouver, British Columbia. I worked at an old roll-top desk in a room with a view of the sea and the mountains. In that little house on 8th Avenue, I finally finished Desert of the Heart, my third novel, in March of 1961, a few days before my 30th birthday. When my 6 complimentary copies arrived in the mail, I realized for the first time that there would be more than one copy of the book. There were hundreds of them out there in the world. Some days later, I went out shyly to see a whole window display of them in a bookstore. I didn't go in. I simply stood across the street and stared. Because it was a first novel, people tried to be polite about it. But a lot of the comments were comments of people who really didn't feel that they were capable of discussing things of this sort. And some of them said it was like being in a bad dream. One of them said, "Why does such a nice-looking young woman write about this?"
The Desert of the Heart is extremely frank in its treatment of lesbianism. Perhaps a little too frank. The author almost makes it seem desirable.
I think it took a huge amount of courage to send a manuscript like Desert of the Heart around in 1962. People often asked us at the Body Politic after we were involved in our trials if we didn't feel brave or courageous. And in fact, we never did. At least I never felt that. And I think the difference was that we were part of a very big thing. We had each other to fall back on. And I don't know what it would have been like in 1962.
Would you like to see some real changes in our attitudes as expressed in law toward homosexuals?
Yes, I would. I don't think it should be ever put into the criminal code. I think it should be taken out, but should be done and in a medical way so that these people could be sent to centers if we feel as citizens who oppose the feeling of this illness and this homosexuality so that they could be rehabilitated.
There are facets of mental illness that are not particularly pretty, and although these things are no longer discussed behind closed doors, is it necessary to bring them into print for display?
Many of us were so proud of the fact that it was Jane had published our book. We bought several copies and gave them away to our friends. And I remember I gave one to one person, and he read it and came back to me and said, is it really about that? And I said, yes, it's about that.
She was in the supermarket buying grapefruit, and she had a grapefruit in each hand, and Jane is quite tall, as you know, and there she was standing with these grapefruits, one in either hand, like Pomona, goddess of the orchards. And this short woman came up and started screaming at her about the immorality of her book. And her reaction to this was 1 part horror, 2 part comedy. Should she hit the woman with the grapefruit? What was she supposed to do? What was she supposed to say? What do you say when somebody starts lambasting you about the immorality of a book that they probably haven't read and certainly haven't understood? So she just stood there with her grapefruits, smiling down benignly.
I think women passed that book around until there were dog-eared copies all over the continent. And for many reasons, either because they were afraid to go buy a copy on their own or simply because it was so important to them that they needed to share it with friends.
I wasn't at all prepared for the kind of public demand that was made on me after Desert of the Heart came out, because a lot of people read that book and felt that I was the only person in the world who could understand their position. You have to know when you're a public person that there are dangers for you, that you can become a target simply because of what you represent. And certainly I have been stalked. I have had threatening mail. I've had hate mail. And I suppose there have been particular moments when I have been afraid. The only time I remember being afraid was watching James Baldwin on the stage and thinking he is so vulnerable. And I suppose it was a transferred fear of my own. In the 50s or 60s, if they made a film about lesbians in Hollywood, they would have the traditional Hollywood happy ending. That is, one woman would kill herself and the other one would get married. And I was not about to give permission for that.
And I had sent her a letter just telling her how much I loved the book and how much I wanted to make the film, and that I had made documentaries prior to that, but this was going to be my first feature film, if she was going to sell me the rights. And she suggested that I go out to Borrego Springs in the desert, just 2 hours outside of Los Angeles, and meet with her and talk about it. So when Jane came down to Borrego Springs, I went out there, schlepping my 16mm projector and all the films I'd ever made, and decided to do a little show and tell. And so I set up my screen in Jane's trailer out there in the trailer camp and showed all my 16mm documentaries.
She showed me every film she'd ever made. And at the end of talking with her about it, I said, I don't think you can make a film of Desert of the Heart, but you can certainly use the book to make your own film and use whatever in it you need to make your own film. And that's what happened. Until our right to consenting sexual acts is established, limited only by the rights of others, no homosexual behavior will be protected because anything any of us does is offensive to the majority. Policing ourselves to be less offensive to that majority is to be part of our own oppression. Tokenism has never been anything else. Where is the homophobia coming from? I think it comes at the extreme end of a society that is anti-sexual. And, you know, my sense is that heterosexuals have been taught to be decently ashamed of their own sexuality. And then here come these people who are saying, we're proud to be homosexual. Now, if they're decently ashamed, certainly we should be at least as decently ashamed as they are. And if we're not, we really are shocking to them. And I've always wanted to organize heterosexual pride days so that we could teach them to feel okay about their sexuality, and then I think they would give us less of a bad time.